guys, Nick here with What Game Now, and today we're going to do the new Coalition Army Box. This is one of the ones that's coming out with the Kickstarter and should hopefully be available late this summer into early fall. So there's only 4 models in the box, so at least 4 different models, and so this should be a fairly short video comparatively. So let's start with the Chasseur. The Chasseur was originally developed for the Southern Republican Army. It was designed very heavily on the Jaeger and was intended to be the first hover-capable gear on Terra Nova. Unfortunately, there were some problems, the biggest one being the fuel economy. It was a very fuel-hungry machine. Given the scale that the South wanted to roll it out on, they just couldn't justify its cost, and through a series of deals, it eventually worked its way into the new Coalition, being sold first to some Badland city-states that then later joined the new Coalition. Once the new Coalition got their hands on it, the Port Arthur Corps and Humanist Alliance engineers got to work on it. Port Arthur, being Earth-based, has a lot of knowledge of hover technology, so they were able to streamline the hover tech in the gear. The Humanist Alliance were able to solve some of the control and handling problems and other generic technical issues. And then at the time, they were also working with a lot of local manufacturers, particularly out of Fort Neal. And what those local manufacturers did is helped ensure that the gear remained producible by the industry in the area. The result was a relatively cheap, hover-capable trooper gear that could tangle well with like a Hunter or a Jaeger, but was also really high-speed and hover-capable. Since then, the Chasseur has seen implementation in the new Coalition across the board as a primary trooper gear. Port Arthur Corps has also adopted it for their own local forces, and it's even working its way into the Humanist Alliance units working alongside and in the new Coalition. So, let's talk profiles. The new Coalition is a fairly new faction, both in-universe and in-game, so there's not a ton of variance on a lot of these machines. All the Chasseurs are general purpose and strike. Some of them pick up fire support. They have a walker hover movement of 9, an armor of 6, hull structure of 3-3, 1 action, gunnery piloting 4-up, and electronic warfare of 6-up. They have the arms trait and nothing else. And all the variants feature a light rocket pack, a light anti-personnel grenade launcher, and a vibro blade. So let's start with the extremes there. Walker hover movement of 9. This thing is 50% faster than pretty much anything in its class. It will outrun a Hunter, it will outrun a Jaeger. It is as fast as a Cheetah. But because it's hover, it gets around a lot of terrain. This thing can move over water fairly quickly. It can hop over obstacles of a certain height. It's a high-speed, very maneuverable machine. Now the downside is you're a little bit more frail than you might want to be, and that's because you're only hull structure 3-3. It's a little bit easier to cripple this thing than it is many of its companion machines. Other than that, its stat line is pretty common for a gear of this type. Gunnery piloting 4-up is not abnormal. It means it's a decent gunnery platform, and it's not especially easy to hit. Your light vibro blade is actually somewhat meaningful on this thing. Electronic warfare is 6+. This is not intended as an electronic warfare machine. There is a command variant, but even then, you're still not going to use this thing for things like forward observation, or at least ideally. And then your weapon loadout's pretty bog standard. You have a light rocket pack to engage heavy targets, an anti-personnel grenade launcher to clear close-up infantry, and a vibro blade for close hand-to-hand. Variance-wise, the baseline Chasseur starts at 7 points, is unlimited in general purpose, and is also available in fire support. This is why that downside of hit points isn't a big deal. The Chasseur is a little more expensive than a Hunter or a Jaeger. This variant comes with a light autocannon. The best commentary here is if you've watched any of our videos before with like the Hunter or the Jaeger, this is just a solid trooper gear. 7 threat value is a little on the high side, but you are getting a lot more maneuverability and speed out of it. What I like about this is it lets New Coalition play very fast and very loose on the table. Next up, we have the Chasseur Gunner. This is a 1 threat value upgrade to the baseline Chasseur. It is no longer available in fire support, and it has a medium autocannon instead of a light. Perfectly fine. The light rocket pack is usually your go-to weapon for anti-armor. The autocannon is for things that have maybe some defensive buffs because of the burst trait. Now, I do find it interesting that the Chasseur Gunner is not available in fire support, which is where I would kind of want it, but alas. Chasseur Grenadiers are 8 threat value, have the fire support UA, and have a light grenade launcher. The light grenade launcher tunes this machine to be a little more of an anti-armor role, although the light grenade launcher does give it some interesting options for indirect reactions. and also cleaning out things in highly built up areas or in very clustered terrain, which is not too bad because it's high speed, lets it get where it needs to go. One of the nice things about being a high speed machine is a lot of those range complaints I have on things like light bazookas, frag cannons, and even grenade launchers to a lesser extent are pretty well washed away when you're Walker Hover 9. The Flechette variant is 7 threat value and has a medium frag cannon. This thing's designed for close-in action, and you know what? It can get there. Is it going to do especially well when it's there? It'll handle itself just fine, but you've got the speed to get there. And then the last variant is the Hellfire, which is available in fire support and has a light bazooka. This is a pure anti-armor variant, but more tuned towards a direct fire role. Again, due to its high speed, the lack of range on the bazooka, at least optimal range, isn't that big of a deal. All Chasseurs do have access to the command upgrade. It makes it a command machine with an electronic warfare skill of 5+. It gains comms and an auxiliary ECCM, so they're actually a little more resistant to electronic warfare, and you'll see this throughout New Coalition. The ECCM is actually a lot more common. Alright, so there's our Chasseur. Next up, we have the Cuirassier, and I've been informed that they're mispronouncing that, but we're going to roll with it because that's just, when I look at the word, that's how I see how to pronounce it. So originally it was based on something called the Xiphos, which was a Humanist Alliance machine developed prior to the Polar War with the intention to improve upon the Black Mamba. They saw the Black Mamba and said, ooh, that's a really good machine, but we can do better. So they promptly did. When the Humanist Alliance connected with Port Arthur Corps connected with Port Arthur to start a knowledge exchange and begin that connection that would later see their move, or at least partial move, to the New Coalition, the Xiphos was part of that exchange, and the Xiphos went with it. And from there it was taken, once New Coalition actually formed and they wanted to do some local production for their own gears, they found the design, introduced it into the series. By the way, all of the NuCoal gears and all that are in the what's called the Gallic series. So that's the overall project that these were all created under. And it was taken there, they looked at it and said, there's improvements we can do on it, there's some local manufacture we can do, there's some swapping out components for interchangeability. But on the whole, the design didn't change too much. It is worth noting that they did try to put hover equipment in it, but they found that due to its already complex design, that wasn't an option. It's also worth noting that in universe, it is used by pilots. It is not only used by pilots who are on the leader side, but also who don't want the hover gear. They want a more traditional gear. And it's used in roles similar to the Black Mamba and Jaguar within those forces. So, profile-wise, the baseline Cuirassier is available in Strike, Recon, and Paratrooper, although it is worth noting that the Recon jumps around. Sometimes it's Fire Sport, sometimes it's Recon, sometimes it's neither. Walker Ground Movement of 7, Armor of 7. All pretty good. Hull Structure 3-3, 1 Action, Piloting Gunnery 3, Electronic Warfare 5+, Arms Agile Airdrop with a light rocket pack, anti-personnel grenade launcher, and a vibro blade. This is essentially a Jaguar. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. Piloting 3 up with Agile makes it fairly hard to hit. Armor 7 makes it reasonably resilient. Hull Structure 3-3 means it's a little bit easier to cripple than you might kind of like, but that's okay. It is airdroppable, so you can airdrop this thing even in non-paratrooper units. Gunnery 3+, good amount of accuracy. Light rocket pack, anti-personnel grenade launcher, and a vibro blade for just that nice coverage across the board that we've talked about in a lot of these videos. The rocket pack gives you anti-tank capability because you have armor piercing. The grenade launcher lets you clear out infantry at short range, and the vibro blade is something for close combat, which this thing can do reasonably well because it is piloting 3+. Alright, your baseline variant's 11 threat value, is unlimited to strike and available in recon, and has a medium autocannon. Not a ton to talk about here. You are paying a lot more than a Chasseur, but you're getting something dramatically more resilient than a Chasseur, plus you're already starting with the medium autocannon. I like these things. They're pretty good all-around units. Walker Ground 7 is a little bit on the slow side for New Coalition, but not unreasonably so. The Hellfire variant is available in fire support and has a medium bazooka. I am glad that it's a medium bazooka, so it actually does hit reasonably hard. Walker Ground 7, it can actually get to places for the most part. This isn't my favorite variant just because, again, I like bazookas anything short range, I like to have it be short range with lots of movement capability. 7 is kind of my minimum cutoff. I'm not a fan of anything less than 7 with a bazooka, just because I worry about getting there. So this thing's on the lower end of acceptable to me on that front. The Long Fang is a very interesting one because it has a heavy rifle. This is very useful because this is one of the few heavy rifles actually available in New Coalition. The rifle is not very common in the faction. So having something, particularly its gunnery 3+, to sit back and just plink with a heavy rifle is not bad. Particularly if you're going to use this in like just some sitting back strike groups. I wish this was available in fire support and not recon, but can't win them all. The Grenadier, 12 threat value, has a medium grenade launcher. Again, see my commentary on the bazooka. The bazooka makes it a pure anti-armor machine. This makes it both anti-armor and some clustered up units with some good indirect capability. I consider it almost an alternate to the bazooka in some cases, but with slightly better ranges, I like it. The Lance, 11 threat value, is a very interesting one because it is literally a baseline Cuirassier, but your medium auto cannon has the anti-air trait. Fun fact, anytime I field one of these, it's actually usually, anytime I field a generic Cuirassier, I usually make it a Lance instead. And the reason why is because there's no downside. And on the off chance your opponent brings aircraft, hey look, I have an anti-aircraft weapon. It's kind of funny that I actually use it quite a bit. Next up we have the Flechette at 10 threat value. This is the cheapest one. Okay. The reason why is because you get a frag cannon. Walker Ground 7, again, a little bit shorter. Keeps the nice flexibility of having an anti-infantry, anti-light target weapon with the rocket pack. Good synergy overall. A little bit on the slower side, but you can make it work. Alright, command variants. For 1 threat value, you get an electronic warfare skill of 4+. That's pretty good. You get a satellite uplink, so it drops to a 3+ in some cases. And if you really want to, you could make this guy, I think you can make him a veteran. Yeah, you can make it a veteran, and electronic warfare specialist to 2+. So you can actually make a pretty decent command Cuirassier. It's not a bad option, especially if you make it a long gunner. It's a really solid commander. Oh, by the way, it also comes with an ECCM because you're in New Coalition, so if you try and fry things around it, it's not bad. I actually sometimes will field a command variant Cuirassier long gunner back around some like fire support elements, which is why I wish it was in the fire support group that you could do this and still have them be in the same unit. But anytime you have something that's like establishing a base of fire or something, just plop this thing back there. I do it with the Lance a fair bit. I actually have a Lance CV that will occasionally go camp out with like a Hussar or something like that. Well, the Hussars already have ECCM, but their job is going to sit back and they're going to protect the big guns, which they can do reasonably well with their anti-air weapon, and then this ECCM on the command variant makes it pretty good. Plus, if you got to make an unopposed electronic warfare roll to issue an order to somebody way the heck over across the table, you're on a 3+. It's not bad, and it's pretty good. Alright, next up we have the Jerboa. So the Jerboa is interesting because it's a pet project by a company called Verton Tech. And Verton Tech was based in the Port Arthur area, and they originally started off with one of their first big deals being a contract to maintain ferrets for Port Arthur. They saw the ferret and said, oh, that's a cool design, but we think we can do better. So they took a ferret, they basically stripped it down to its cockpit, elongated the cockpit, and stuck some jet engines on the back. And they said, hey, here's our brand new gear. Unfortunately, it was rather dangerous because it didn't have a lot of armor, and it was very fast because you have jet engines on wheels. So they ended up mothballing it, and eventually, as time went on, they were talking with Port Arthur when the Galaxy series was rolling around, and briefly mentioned, hey, by the way, we have this high-speed gear sitting around. They didn't necessarily intend it to be sold, but Port Arthur and Humanist looked at it and said, ooh, we like that. So they took it, and they said, we need a recon gear, so they reworked it into a reconnaissance gear, and since then, it's been adopted by pretty much all NuCoal forces as the primary recon gear, ousting cheetahs and all that. And once you see the profiles, there's kind of a good justification why I actually love these things. And it is noticeable that this does see a fair amount of civilian use. It's kind of like the new version of the Ferret. There's an entire racing scene that is essentially all Jerboas. Alright, so let's talk about the machines here. The Jerboa is available in recon and fire support in all of the different variants. has a walker ground movement of 9 and armor of 4, just a little bit low. Hull structure 3-3. 1 action, gunnery 5+, piloting 3, electronic warfare 4. All the variants have a rocket pack, which has been reduced to damage 6, an anti-personnel grenade launcher, and a vibroblade. They all come stock with the arms trait, perfectly fine, a jetpack 6, comms, and then some variation on the sensors trait. So let's work our way through this here. Comms means that you can make this a command machine and not really have an issue with that. If you need to issue orders or do something like that to somebody in formation, you're good to go. Jetpack 6 means you can get in some weird places. What Jetpack lets you do is essentially replace your move with the jetpack move, and you can do things like hop up terrain, hop over things that you would normally have to drive around. So good bit of maneuverability, which is kind of important because this thing doesn't hover. It is on wheels, although it is movement 9. The most notable downside here is you're not agile, which is kind of important, but you are piloting 3+ on an armor 4 model. You really, really, really have to be careful. I constantly have to remind myself that this thing does not have agile. Constantly have to remind myself, because you think it would, because, well, like a cheetah or an iguana or something like that, but nope, Jerboa does not have it. But it also makes it just a little bit less durable than maybe I would like, especially considering it's armor 4, but you aren't paying as many points for it. Anyway, going into the actual variants themselves, oh, I forgot, all of them come with an ECM as well, because electronic warfare gear. Let's chat variants here. So, the baseline Jerboa is available unlimited in recon and also picks up the fire support UA. Oh, I forgot. I'm doing real good today. All Jerboas have a light rifle. I don't like. Why you have light rifle on a gunnery 5+ model? I do like it because it does encourage you to stay a little bit back, although I wish its sensors were a little bit longer of a tether. Anyway, weapon loadout, this is not an attack machine, although it can go pick on really heavy targets with its rocket pack. Alright, baseline Jerboa, so I mentioned all that. Unique traits to it. It starts with an ECM+, so it does not have agile, but it starts with ECM defense in play. That's kind of important. You know, this thing's sitting on 3, potentially 4 defense dice at piloting 3+. You're going to have a hard time hitting it. It is worth noting that it does have Brawler -1. That is not a typo. It is actually Brawler -1. What that means is if you make a melee attack with it, you are -1 dice. So even though this thing's piloting 3+, it's not really a duelist machine, like we saw with the cheetah and even the iguana to an extent. And sensors 26. Baseline Jerboas, you know what? They're 8 points. I quite like them. The fact that they start with ECM+ is kind of a big deal. Next up, we have the Jerboa Flash. We lose the strike UA, unfortunate, but we pick up a target designator, and its sensors ups to 36. This is my, well, okay, this is one of my 2 preferred Jerboa variants. Sensors 36 allows it to hang back. It's a fun note, it's only gear 1 on height, so it's only an inch tall. It is actually very easy to hide and get cover on this thing. So the agile, while the numbers don't work out, the circumstances around the Jerboa running around the table actually does make it fairly durable. Sensors 36 gives you a lot of range to play around with for your ECM+. It is still an ECM+, and you have a stock target designator, which is kind of useful. It is worth noting that when we get to the Chevalier, you will see some guided stuff floating around. The baseline Jerboa doesn't come with a target designator. The Flash does. Usually when I field the Jerboa, it starts life as a Flash, unless I have a compelling reason to make it something else. And there is a compelling reason to make it something else. We'll get to that when we get to the Sentry. So, Flash, me likey. The Fist. So the Fist is kind of in the same vein as like a Metal Cat, where you, it's like a strike cheetah, I guess would be the best way to describe it. You're only 8 threat value. You're losing the ECM+, which is super sad, but you can still put it up on turn 1. You lose Brawler -1, so this actually could be a duelist machine here. So, downside, you lose ECM+. Good thing, you lose Brawler -1, but you pick up a light Panzerfaust, just stock. Now, you are Gunnery 5+, but This thing's kind of fast. This actually makes a pretty decent, like, go run to the backfield harasser unit. So I actually don't mind it in that role. This thing can go run around to the back of the table. You know, hey, you have a fire support gear or something slow, and just plink it to death. And then lastly, we have the Sentry, which is my other preferred variant. At 9 threat value, what this machine picks up is it drops its ECM plus to an ECM. Not the best thing in the world, but okay. What do we get? We get an auxiliary setup. Oh, and by the way, none of the traits I just listed before are auxiliary. That's kind of a big deal. Means that this Jerboa, you actually have to kill it to shut it down. It's at least capable of doing all of these things. The setup lets it potentially be Electronic Warfare 3 up, which you can even drop to a 2 up. So what I look at on my Jerboas is the Jerboa Flash is where I start, because I like the durability, I like the options. Yeah, you're only Electronic Warfare 4 up, but that's not the end of the world. That's a perfectly serviceable Electronic Warfare skill. What the Sentry does is, if you need reliable, unopposed rolls. Now, I've usually found that when the Jerboa is making a roll, it tends to be opposed if your opponent can, but there's an argument for the Sentry in that slot. I also do like the fact that the Flash has Sensors 36. It's just me. Alright, closing this out, we have the Chevalier. So the Chevalier, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that in some way because French. Originally, the Chevalier started life as a construction gear called a Sapper, and the thing about it was the New Coalition needed a fire support gear for the Gaelic series, and Fort Neal, the company that was making the Chevalier, or working on it, said, hey, we can take this design, rework it into a heavy fire support gear, and they did. So they actually produced both machines. Fort Neal had done some local production with the Boa, Python, and Bear gears, so they kind of knew how to do big, chunky, heavy gears without really having a lot of design experience. So they applied that to the Chevalier, and you get this big, chunky, heavy, really just hunk of metal fire support gear that almost looks out of place in the faction when you look at how fast and sleek a lot of the other stuff is. It's designed and produced entirely in NuCoal, where it serves as fire support, anti-air, and heavy strike rolls. Variant-wise, the Chevaliers are all fire support and strike UAs. The baseline is unlimited in fire support. That's the only variation. Walker ground movement of 5, armor 8, hull structure 4-2. 1 action, piloting 4 up, gunnery 4 up, piloting 5 up, electronic warfare 6 up, arms and react plus, all baseline, and the variants come with, at a minimum, a heavy machine gun and a light vibroblade. There's a lot of variation on the weapons itself. The heavy machine gun and vibroblade, they're there because you have them. It's worth noting it's a linked heavy machine gun, so it's actually not as bad or as useless as it might be on some other models. All the variants have React Plus because pretty much all of them have a guided or indirect capable weapon that they're going to want to be able to react with. Piloting 5 up, armor 4, hull structure 4-2 makes this thing fairly resilient, if not somewhat easier to hit. Gunnery 4 up means it's perfectly serviceable and it's actually do damage roll. Walker ground movement of 5 is not a particularly big deal. It will get you where you need to go, but it's not going to give you a lot of options over the course of the entire game. Use-wise, I find the Chevalier actually makes sense in very similar roles to where we see things like the Grizzly, although it tends to prefer a little bit more back, and when we get to the variants, that'll make sense. So the baseline Chevalier starts at 13 points. All of them are 13 points, which is really nice. It's unlimited in fire support, it has a heavy autocannon, artillery rockets with the fire trait, and a guided mortar. So the guided mortar is really cool because, like we talked about the Grizzly, this has effectively no minimum range. The heavy autocannon and the light artillery rockets kind of do combo reasonably well. You'll at least have access to 2 weapons at pretty much any range band, which is nice, so you can leverage your React Plus. Artillery rockets is there because fire and also larger area. Guided mortar is there for accuracy. Your heavy autocannon is your round-around weapon. I do find it a little unfortunate it doesn't come with a rocket pack. So the baseline Chevalier actually doesn't like to fight heavy armored targets as much as, say, a Grizzly or even a Cobra would. Now, when we get to the variants, though, that does change a little bit. The Chevalier Hellfire has a medium bazooka and anti-personnel rockets with the linked trait. And that's a very interesting variant. The fact that they're anti-personnel rockets is a little unfortunate, but they do have fire too, and they are linked. So it does punch a little higher than you would expect just by looking at it. Medium bazooka, but on a model that's Walker Ground 5, it's perfectly fine. You still keep the guided mortar. I do like that. The guided mortar does hang around for this variant. So you have something to do more often than not, but I want to like this, and for some reason I've never been able to. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. But man, I wish those weren't anti-personnel rockets. It's also a little bit on the slow side for the bazooka, but if you were going to play like a mid-table unit, it's not the apocalypse. Other variants here, the Chevalier Hammer. The Hammer has a heavy rifle, keeps the artillery rockets with Fire 1, and a light artillery gun with the braced trait. Now, that's not bad. And I find it very interesting that it has the light artillery gun, specifically with the braced trait. Because weirdly enough, the Chevalier Hammer plays really nicely without a commander. It's kind of strange, because it wants to brace itself for the light artillery gun. The order for let them have it gives you stable, which doesn't work if you're braced. So it kind of doesn't benefit from that order, which is really cool because this makes a fantastic splash as a secondary unit. Because that way, like, say for example you have a strike unit that's going to play very aggressive, but you need a fire support element somewhere. This makes a good option because you can throw it on that secondary unit, and the fact that it doesn't have a commander nearby it to issue it orders doesn't really bother it. It's going to sit there, it's going to brace, you can bomb on something with artillery rockets, you have the artillery gun, and it's worth noting, that is an artillery gun, not a field gun. That is kind of an important distinction. And a heavy rifle for good long-range capability. You know what? I like this thing. It also looks really cool because it's got a lot of really big gun barrels sticking out of it. Chevalier Spear. This is actually one of my go-to variants. This is more in line with a Grizzly, where it's going to try and get to the middle of the table to leverage its weapons. And the reason why is because it has a heavy autocannon. Cool. Linked heavy rocket packs. It has a linked heavy rocket pack, a damage 9, armor piercing, area effect linked rocket pack. This is a very good weapon. The autocannon you can still use if you need it, and the autocannon actually gets reverted to a completely react plus weapon here. The Chevalier is going to walk up, bomb something with its rockets, and shoot you with the heavy autocannon on your turn. I like this thing. This is a really cool variant. And I also like it because it's not trying to do anything else. It is very obviously you're going to shoot the rocket and then react with the autocannon on your turn. Congratulations. Very straightforward machine. Last up we have the Javelin, and the Javelin has an anti-tank missile. Anti-tank missile, really good, especially with the medium anti-tank missile. This is more of an anti-vehicle variant, or anti-heavy armor variant. Still keeps the heavy autocannon for lighter targets, good coverage. You know what? It's perfectly fine. It's not one of the variants that I have as many of. I personally keep extra hammers and spears lying around. But you know what? You can get on board with it. The only variant on the Chevalier that I'm not the biggest fan of is the Hellfire. Other than that, the Spear and the baseline Chevalier are perfectly fine. The Javelin and the baseline are perfectly fine. I love me some hammers and spears. Command variants, we still have a command variant here. It is Electronic Warfare 5 up, does have SAT up, so it could drop to a 4 if you have an unopposed role. So this isn't the end of the world to make a commander to then try and issue orders somewhere else. It's not the end of the world. It's still not great. And it does come stock with an ECCM, so if somebody tries to fry it and prevent it from firing or prevent it from firing as effectively, you have an ECCM to back you up on that. So that walks us through the New Coalition Army Box. I'm a New Coalition player, so I have a lot of extra commentary on this I didn't make it in the video, so I will catch you guys later.
Hey, this is Dave. If you like what we're doing here at What Game Now, go ahead and click on one of the videos which should be on either side of me, or click right in the middle and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell once you subscribe so that you know when we have new videos. Please go ahead and share us with your friends. Let everybody know that we're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of our subscribers already, and we look forward to bringing you more content every chance that we get.